The boardroom fell silent when Admiral Reeves finished speaking. Outside the Pentagon's reinforced windows, Washington, D.C. hummed with its usual bureaucratic rhythm, but inside Conference Room 3A, time seemed suspended. 23 of the military's most decorated officers sat frozen, staring at the classified briefing photos scattered across the mahogany table. Each image showed the same impossible scene. A single aircraft, call sign Phantom 7, hovering motionless above a terrorist compound while an entire SEAL team, Alpha 6, stood with weapons lowered, hands raised in what could only be described as surrender. "Gentlemen," Admiral Reeves said, his weathered face betraying nothing, "we have a situation that defies every protocol in our playbook." The photos showed thermal imaging from 3 separate satellites, all confirming the same inexplicable moment frozen in time. At 3:47 hours during what should have been a routine extraction mission in the Helmand province, something unprecedented had occurred. The mission parameters were straightforward. Alpha 6 would neutralize high-value targets while Phantom 7 provided close air support. Instead, the most elite fighting force in the world had simply stopped. The silence stretched until Colonel Martinez, a decorated Apache pilot with 2 tours under his belt, finally spoke. "Sir, with respect, what exactly are we looking at here?" His voice carried the skepticism of a man who had seen combat across 4 continents and trusted only what his eyes confirmed twice over. Admiral Reeves touched a control panel, and the wall-mounted display flickered to life with grainy infrared footage. The timestamp read 0346:42 GMT. On screen, Alpha 6 moved with their characteristic precision through the compound's outer perimeter. Phantom 7 circled overhead, a sleek shadow against the star-scattered sky. Everything appeared textbook perfect until 0347:15, when the aircraft descended to an impossibly low hover 30 feet above the courtyard and simply waited. The SEAL team leader, visible through his helmet camera feed, had raised his weapon toward the aircraft. Standard protocol when air support deviated from mission parameters. But then something extraordinary happened. The aircraft's external lights pulsed once, twice, 3 times in a pattern that wasn't in any military manual. Team leader Ramirez, a man who had never hesitated in 7 years of special operations, slowly lowered his rifle. His team followed suit one by one, until all 6 operators stood with empty hands raised toward the hovering aircraft. The mission clock showed 17 minutes of this impossible standoff before Phantom 7 simply vanished from all tracking systems, leaving Alpha 6 standing alone in an empty courtyard, unable to explain what had transpired. The targets had evaporated like morning mist, and 6 of America's deadliest warriors remembered nothing beyond a voice that seemed to speak directly into their souls, commanding them to stop, to listen, to understand that everything they thought they knew was about to change forever in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. The woman behind the voice remained a ghost, her identity buried beneath layers of classification that made state secrets look like grocery lists. But Admiral Reeves knew exactly who Phantom 7 was, and that knowledge terrified him more than any enemy he had ever faced in 35 years of service. Because Kestrel Thorne, billionaire, philanthropist, and former Navy pilot, had just accomplished something that should have been impossible for anyone, let alone someone the Pentagon had written off as a publicity stunt 3 years ago. The FA-18E Super Hornet that materialized above Forward Operating Base Chapman at dawn bore no standard military markings. Instead of the familiar blue and gold of Navy squadrons, this aircraft wore matte black paint so deep it seemed to absorb light itself. The only identification visible to the naked eye was a small silver falcon emblem on the vertical stabilizer, a personal touch that spoke of resources far beyond military budgets. As the aircraft settled into its assigned parking spot with mechanical precision, ground crews exchanged uncertain glances. They had serviced thousands of military aircraft, but this one radiated an aura of technological sophistication that made their standard equipment feel primitive by comparison. Captain Rebecca Phoenix Martinez stood at the flightline operations desk, reviewing the morning's flight schedule with barely concealed irritation. As the base's senior flight operations officer, she prided herself on maintaining order in what was inherently chaotic work. The last-minute addition of an unscheduled civilian contractor had disrupted her carefully orchestrated logistics, forcing her to reassign 2 training flights and postpone a maintenance inspection that was already behind schedule. The fact that this disruption came courtesy of someone with more money than flight hours only amplified her frustration. "Ma'am, Phantom 7 is requesting immediate refuel and weapons loading," Sergeant Thompson reported, his voice carrying the careful neutrality that enlisted personnel used when navigating between officers and civilian authorities. The young crew chief had learned early in his career that the safest position during conflicts between competing power structures was strict adherence to protocol and strategic invisibility. Martinez glanced at the aircraft through the operations center's reinforced windows. Even from this distance, the Super Hornet's modifications were obvious to her experienced eye. Extended wingtips suggested upgraded avionics packages. The nose cone's subtle reshaping indicated advanced radar systems. Most tellingly, the aircraft's exhaust nozzles bore the telltale signs of thrust vectoring technology that was still classified on active-duty fighters. Someone had invested serious money and considerable political influence to acquire military hardware that shouldn't have been available to civilian contractors, regardless of their net worth or connections. Standard loadout? Martinez asked, though she suspected the answer would complicate her day further. Civilian contractors typically carried training ordnance or basic defensive systems. They didn't request the kind of weapons packages that could level city blocks or engage multiple aerial targets simultaneously. Thompson consulted his tablet, his expression growing increasingly uncertain. Negative, ma'am, she's requesting a full combat load. Air-to-air missiles, precision-guided munitions, electronic warfare pods, the complete package. Her weapons authorization codes check out, but... He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what he was reading. But what, Sergeant? Martinez's voice carried the edge that subordinates learned to recognize as a warning. She had no patience for incomplete reports, especially when they involved potentially dangerous situations that could reflect poorly on her command. Ma'am, according to the system, she's cleared for weapons that we don't typically issue to contractors. Hell, some of this ordnance is restricted for senior squadron commanders only. Thompson's voice dropped to just above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might attract unwanted attention from forces beyond their understanding or control. Martinez pulled the authorization codes up on her own terminal, her skepticism transforming into genuine concern as she reviewed the clearance levels. The woman requesting these weapons possessed security authorizations that rivaled those of squadron commanders with decades of service. More troubling still, her flight plan indicated a solo mission into contested airspace that would challenge even the most experienced combat pilots flying in formation with full support packages. The hangar doors slid open with hydraulic precision, revealing the pilot who had caused such disruption to the morning's routine. Captain Martinez found herself face-to-face with a woman whose presence immediately commanded attention without demanding it. Kestrel Thorne stood barely 5'6", but she possessed the kind of confident bearing that made height irrelevant. Her flight suit bore no rank insignia, no squadron patches, no visible markers of military affiliation beyond the professional way she wore the equipment. Yet everything about her posture, her movement, her steady gaze spoke of someone who belonged in military aircraft and dangerous situations. Captain Martinez, Thorne's voice carried the crisp diction of someone accustomed to being heard and understood the first time. I understand there may be some questions about my mission parameters. I'd prefer to address any concerns directly rather than create unnecessary delays for your operations schedule. Martinez had prepared a dozen pointed questions about authorization procedures and safety protocols, but found herself momentarily speechless. The woman standing before her radiated competence in ways that transcended paperwork and bureaucratic procedures. Her eyes held the particular steadiness that marked pilots who had faced genuine danger and emerged stronger for the experience. This wasn't the pampered civilian contractor that Martinez had expected to manage and probably babysit through some publicity-driven exercise. Your weapons request is comprehensive, Martinez began, falling back on professional language while her instincts recalibrated their initial assessment. Standard protocol requires detailed mission briefings for civilian contractors carrying restricted ordnance into contested areas. The safety requirements alone. Captain, Thorne interrupted gently, I understand your concerns and they're valid. Unfortunately, my mission parameters remain classified at levels that would require additional clearances for disclosure. What I can tell you is that I've flown similar aircraft in similar conditions before, and I take safety protocols very seriously. She paused, studying Martinez's expression with obvious respect for her position and authority. Perhaps we could review my flight credentials and previous mission reports while your crew completes the weapons loading. That might address some of your operational concerns. The credentials file that Thorne handed over was surprisingly thick for someone Martinez had assumed was primarily a businesswoman playing at military operations. The first page contained flight hours that rivaled those of active-duty squadron commanders. Over 3,000 hours in military aircraft, including significant time in combat zones and high-threat environments. Letters of commendation from senior officers praised her technical skills, tactical judgment, and performance under pressure in terms typically reserved for career military pilots. You flew interdiction missions in Syria, Martinez asked, her tone shifting from skeptical oversight to professional recognition. The mission reports detailed complex air-to-ground operations that required precisely the kind of advanced training and authorization that Thorne was now requesting for her current assignment. 18 months with the 94th Fighter Squadron, Thorne confirmed. Mostly close air support and strategic reconnaissance, but some air-to-air engagements when Syrian air defenses proved more active than intelligence had predicted. She spoke matter-of-factly, without the boastful tone that Martinez associated with civilian contractors trying to impress military personnel with exaggerated credentials and overstated achievements. Martinez flipped through mission after-action reports that painted a picture of a pilot who had consistently performed at the highest levels under conditions that challenged even veteran combat aviators. One report, signed by a colonel she recognized and respected, specifically praised Thorne's exceptional situational awareness and tactical judgment during complex multi-threat engagements. Another documented her successful extraction of a downed reconnaissance team under heavy fire, an operation that required precisely the kind of precision flying and split-second decision-making that separated competent pilots from exceptional ones. "Why leave active duty?" Martinez asked, genuine curiosity replacing her initial irritation. Pilots with Thorne's credentials and combat record typically pursued military careers to their natural conclusions, earning commands and eventually flag rank through continued service and demonstrated leadership. Walking away from that trajectory to pursue civilian contracting suggested either serious dissatisfaction with military bureaucracy or compelling personal circumstances that had forced difficult choices. Thorne's expression grew momentarily distant, as if the question had touched on memories that required careful handling. "Philosophical differences about mission priorities and resource allocation," she said finally. "The military does exceptional work within its constraints, but sometimes situations require approaches that don't fit standard operational frameworks. I found myself in a position to pursue those alternative approaches more effectively from outside the traditional command structure." The hangar buzzed with controlled chaos as Thorne's Super Hornet underwent its pre-mission preparations. Master Sergeant Davies, a 20-year veteran of weapons-loading operations, supervised his crew with the meticulous attention to detail that had kept him alive through 3 combat deployments. Each missile, each electronic warfare pod, each piece of ordnance received individual inspection and verification before installation. Davies had worked on thousands of aircraft over his career, but this particular loadout challenged even his extensive experience with advanced weapon systems. "Ma'am, these AIM-260 missiles aren't in our standard inventory," Sergeant Collins reported, consulting his technical manual while examining the sleek air-to-air weapons that had arrived on a separate transport just hours before Thorne's aircraft. The missiles bore manufacturer's markings that indicated recent production, suggesting they incorporated the latest technological advances in guidance systems and electronic countermeasures that wouldn't reach standard squadron inventories for months or possibly years. Davies nodded, his weathered hands steady as he verified the weapon's interface connections with practiced efficiency. "Special authorization, Collins. These birds are about 3 generations ahead of what we typically hang on Super Hornets. Advanced propulsion, improved seeker heads, extended range capabilities that push the envelope of what's theoretically possible for air-to-air engagement." He spoke quietly, aware that such advanced weaponry attracted attention and questions that were above his pay grade to answer definitively. The electronic warfare pods presented even more intriguing challenges. Standard electromagnetic warfare equipment was designed to jam enemy radar and communications systems within predictable parameters. These pods radiated the kind of sophisticated energy signatures that suggested capabilities far beyond defensive jamming. Davies had seen similar equipment once before, during a classified demonstration at Nellis Air Force Base, where advanced systems had effectively rendered an entire simulated enemy air defense network completely blind and helpless within minutes. "Sergeant Davies, is there a problem with the weapons loading?" Thorne approached the work area with casual confidence, her flight helmet tucked under her arm in the universal gesture of pilots preparing for demanding missions. She moved through the busy hangar with obvious familiarity, stepping around equipment and personnel with the spatial awareness that marked experienced aviators who understood aircraft operations instinctively. "No, ma'am, just ensuring everything meets specifications," Davies replied, his tone reflecting the respect that senior enlisted personnel reserved for pilots who had proven themselves in combat. "These systems are impressive. We don't see this level of technology very often outside special operations units." His statement was carefully neutral, neither questioning her authority to possess such advanced equipment nor expressing the curiosity that such unusual circumstances naturally generated. Thorne smiled, an expression that seemed to acknowledge both the sergeant's professionalism and the unusual nature of her requirements. Master Sergeant, I understand that my equipment requests are outside normal parameters. If you have concerns about any system compatibility or safety procedures, please don't hesitate to voice them. I'd rather address technical issues on the ground than discover problems at altitude under operational pressure. Davies appreciated the directness. Too many officers, particularly those with limited practical experience, dismissed enlisted expertise or ignored potential problems that could compromise mission success and personnel safety. This woman clearly understood that weapons loading was serious business, requiring cooperation between aircrew and ground personnel who possessed complementary but equally essential skills and knowledge. Ma'am, the systems check out perfectly, Davies confirmed after completing his final inspections. Your aircraft is configured for extended-range air-to-air engagement with full electronic warfare capabilities. Whatever you're planning to encounter out there, you'll have the tools to handle it effectively. He paused, professional curiosity overcoming his typical reserve. If you don't mind me asking, what kind of mission requires this particular combination of offensive and defensive systems? Thorne's expression grew serious as she considered her response. The mission briefing she had received 12 hours earlier contained information that would remain classified for decades, involving threats that challenged conventional understanding of aerial warfare and international security. Sergeant, let's just say that some situations require capabilities that exceed standard operational parameters. Today's mission falls into that category. The pre-flight briefing room felt charged with tension as Colonel Harrison reviewed the morning's intelligence updates. Satellite imagery covered the briefing table in systematic overlays, each photograph revealing terrain features and potential threats across the target area. The mission that had seemed straightforward during initial planning had evolved into something considerably more complex as new intelligence revealed the presence of advanced surface-to-air missile systems and coordinated air defense networks that hadn't appeared in previous reconnaissance. Ladies and gentlemen, our situation has changed significantly since yesterday's briefing, Colonel Harrison began, his voice carrying the gravity that marked senior officers discussing potentially lethal complications. Intelligence now indicates that our target area is defended by integrated air defense systems that include radar-guided missile batteries and coordinated fighter patrols. What we initially assessed as a low-threat reconnaissance mission has become a penetration of heavily defended airspace. Captain Rodriguez, Alpha Flight senior pilot, studied the updated threat assessment with obvious concern. Sir, these SAM sites are positioned to provide overlapping coverage across the entire approach corridor. Standard penetration tactics would require a full strike package with dedicated electronic warfare support and SEAD suppression missions. Are we looking at a postponement until proper resources can be allocated? Harrison's expression remained neutral, but his pause suggested complications that extended beyond simple tactical planning. Negative, Captain. Mission timeline remains unchanged. However, we do have additional support assets available. He gestured toward the back of the briefing room where Thorne sat quietly reviewing her own mission materials. Phantom 7 will be operating in the same general area and has volunteered to provide electronic warfare support if required. The room's atmosphere shifted perceptibly as 12 seasoned combat pilots turned to examine the civilian contractor they had previously dismissed as a publicity-seeking amateur. Rodriguez's skepticism was barely concealed as he addressed Thorne directly. Ma'am, no disrespect intended, but electronic warfare in contested airspace requires coordination and experience that takes years to develop. One mistake in timing or positioning could compromise the entire mission and put American lives at risk. Thorne stood slowly, her movement deliberate and confident. When she spoke, her voice carried none of the defensive tone that Rodriguez's challenge might have provoked from less experienced personnel. Captain Rodriguez, your concerns are entirely valid. Electronic warfare coordination requires precise timing and thorough understanding of threat systems. Perhaps we could review my technical qualifications and previous mission experience before making final operational decisions. The credentials briefing that followed transformed the room's dynamic completely. Thorne's combat record included successful penetration of some of the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world, often operating independently in situations where coordination with larger formations was impossible or tactically inadvisable. Her electronic warfare expertise had been developed through missions that pushed the boundaries of what single aircraft could accomplish against integrated defense networks. You disabled an entire SAM network in Libya, Lieutenant Foster asked, his voice reflecting the mixture of respect and disbelief that such an achievement naturally generated. The mission report detailed a solo penetration of Libyan airspace that had resulted in the complete neutralization of surface-to-air missiles protecting a terrorist training facility, accomplished without kinetic strikes that might have caused collateral damage or international complications. The electronic warfare systems required some creative application, Thorne acknowledged modestly. But yes, the mission achieved its objectives without alerting neighboring defense networks or causing broader escalation concerns. Sometimes unconventional approaches produce better results than overwhelming force, particularly when political considerations require surgical precision rather than comprehensive destruction. Colonel Harrison consulted his mission timeline, calculating coordination requirements and communication protocols that would integrate Thorne's independent operation with Alpha Flight's planned approach. Phantom 7, can you provide electronic warfare support beginning at 800 hours and maintain coverage through Alpha Flight's egress window? Confirmed, Colonel. I can establish a jamming pattern that will create a corridor through the SAM coverage while maintaining sufficient standoff distance to avoid compromising Alpha Flight's approach profiles. Thorne spoke with the technical precision that marked pilots who had successfully managed complex electronic warfare missions under operational pressure. The mission briefing concluded with communication protocols and contingency plans that accounted for the unusual nature of civilian-military cooperation in contested airspace. As pilots filed out to begin their individual aircraft preparations, Rodriguez approached Thorne with obvious curiosity, overcoming his initial skepticism. "Ma'am, I apologize for questioning your qualifications earlier. Your record speaks for itself." Rodriguez paused, choosing his words carefully. "But I have to ask, why contract work instead of active duty? With your experience and capabilities, you could be commanding squadrons or developing tactical doctrine at the highest levels." Thorne's smile held a mixture of appreciation for his professionalism and sadness for opportunities that circumstances had made impossible. "Captain, sometimes the most important missions can't be accomplished through traditional military channels. The Pentagon excels at many things, but institutional constraints occasionally prevent optimal solutions to emerging threats. I found myself in a position to address those gaps from outside the standard command structure." The pre-dawn darkness at Forward Operating Base Chapman buzzed with the controlled energy of military operations preparing to unfold. Ground crews moved between aircraft with practiced efficiency, conducting final systems checks and fuel top-offs that would determine mission success or failure in the hours ahead. The flight line's harsh artificial lighting created stark shadows between aircraft, giving the scene an otherworldly quality that enhanced the gravity of pending operations. Thorne completed her walk-around inspection with methodical thoroughness, examining every external system, weapons mounting point, and potential point of failure that could compromise her aircraft's performance during the demanding mission ahead. Her Super Hornet represented the cutting edge of aviation technology, but she had learned through hard experience that sophisticated equipment only performed reliably when human operators maintained absolute attention to detail and preparation. Phantom 7, this is Tower Control. Weather update shows developing storm systems along your planned route. Current conditions are marginal VFR with deteriorating visibility expected after 900 hours. The air traffic controller's voice carried the professional concern that marked personnel responsible for flight safety in challenging conditions. Tower Control, Phantom 7 copies weather update. Request permission to adjust departure time to 6:30 to avoid developing weather systems along route segments 2 and 3. Thorne's response reflected her understanding that successful mission completion required flexibility and willingness to adapt plans when circumstances demanded tactical adjustments. Phantom 7 cleared for early departure. Adjusted flight plan approved. Be advised, Alpha Flight will be departing at 6:45 hours on similar routing. Recommend coordination for potential mutual support if weather conditions deteriorate beyond forecast parameters. Thorne acknowledged the communication while calculating fuel management and timing requirements that would position her aircraft optimally for both her primary mission objectives and potential support to Alpha Flight if circumstances required intervention. The mission's complexity had increased significantly since initial planning, but her experience with fluid tactical situations provided confidence that adaptive problem-solving could overcome emerging challenges successfully. The cockpit startup sequence proceeded with familiar precision as Thorne activated systems that transformed her aircraft from sophisticated machinery into a lethal extension of her tactical judgment and piloting skills. Each switch position, every display parameter, all communication frequencies received verification against mission requirements and contingency protocols that might become necessary if standard procedures proved inadequate for emerging threats. Phantom 7, Phoenix Control, radio check on tactical frequency, came the transmission from Captain Martinez, whose initial skepticism had evolved into professional respect following their earlier discussions about mission requirements and coordination protocols. The flight operations officer had recognized Thorne's competence and was now providing the kind of support that ensured mission success through careful attention to communication and logistical details. Phoenix Control, Phantom 7, loud and clear on tactical. Ready for engine start and taxi clearance when available. Thorne's response reflected her appreciation for Martinez's professional approach and willingness to provide essential support despite the unconventional nature of civilian contractor operations in contested environments. The F-404 engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, generating the tremendous power that would carry Thorne's aircraft through the challenging mission ahead. As she completed her final system checks and prepared for taxi clearance, she reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. A journey from active duty service through personal transformation to a role that allowed her to serve American interests from outside traditional military structures. Tower Control, Phantom 7, ready for taxi and departure. The transmission marked her transition from preparation to execution, from planning to action, from theory to the unforgiving reality of solo combat operations in hostile airspace, where split-second decisions would determine mission success and personal survival. The runway stretched ahead like a gray ribbon in the pre-dawn darkness, its edges marked by lights that would guide her aircraft into the hostile sky, where her unique capabilities and unconventional resources would be tested against threats that had challenged conventional military approaches. As Thorne advanced the throttles and felt her Super Hornet accelerate toward takeoff speed, she carried with her the hopes of ground personnel, the trust of fellow aviators, and the responsibility of proving that sometimes the most effective solutions came from unexpected sources. The Super Hornet lifted off into darkness that seemed to swallow sound itself, climbing steadily through air so clear that stars appeared close enough to touch. Thorne settled into the familiar rhythm of single-ship operations, managing navigation, communications, and threat assessment simultaneously while maintaining the heightened situational awareness that solo combat missions demanded. Behind her, the lights of forward operating base Chapman faded into geometric patterns that marked the boundary between safety and the unknown dangers ahead. Phantom 7, departure control, radar contact established. Cleared direct to waypoint Alpha, climb and maintain flight level 350. The controller's voice provided the last human connection she would have for the next several hours as her mission carried her beyond the range of friendly communications into airspace where hostile forces might detect her presence at any moment. Departure control, Phantom 7, direct waypoint Alpha, climbing to flight level 350. Her acknowledgement marked the transition into truly independent operations, where her survival would depend on aircraft performance, tactical judgment, and the advanced electronic warfare systems that had been specifically configured for this unprecedented mission. The flight management system indicated 93 minutes to the initial target area, where intelligence reports suggested the presence of advanced surface-to-air missile systems and coordinated air defense networks that had successfully engaged previous reconnaissance attempts. Thorne's mission involved more than simple intelligence gathering. Her objectives required penetration of hostile airspace and successful completion of tasks that conventional military assets had been unable to accomplish through standard operational approaches. As altitude increased, the curvature of the Earth became visible through her night vision systems, a reminder of the vast distances and complex geography that characterized modern aerial warfare. Her route would carry her across international boundaries and through airspace controlled by forces that had demonstrated willingness to engage American aircraft with advanced weapons systems and sophisticated tactics. The electronic warfare suite activated automatically as she crossed into potentially hostile territory, generating the complex electromagnetic signatures that would confuse enemy radar systems and provide some protection against surface-to-air missiles that might be launched against her aircraft. The systems represented the latest developments in stealth technology and active countermeasures, capabilities that existed nowhere else in the world except in this uniquely configured aircraft. Alpha Flight Phantom 7 crossing waypoint Bravo on schedule. Electronic warfare package is active and showing nominal parameters, ready to provide support as coordinated. Her transmission to the formation that would be following her route provided tactical information and confirmed her ability to deliver the specialized capabilities that their mission success required. Phantom 7 Alpha Flight Leader, roger your position and status report. We're currently 20 minutes behind schedule due to weather delays, but expect to be in the area by 8:30 hours. Appreciate your advance work on threat suppression. Captain Rodriguez's response reflected his evolution from skeptical colleague to professional partner who recognized the value of unconventional capabilities in challenging operational environments. The landscape below revealed itself through infrared imaging systems as a patchwork of urban areas, agricultural regions, and military installations that represented the complex political and tactical environment where her mission would unfold. Intelligence briefings had identified specific locations where hostile forces maintained command and control facilities. But the fluid nature of modern warfare meant that threat locations and defensive postures could change rapidly in response to detected reconnaissance activities. Threat warning systems remained quiet as Thorne penetrated deeper into hostile territory, suggesting that either her stealth capabilities were functioning effectively or that enemy forces were maintaining electronic silence to avoid revealing their defensive positions until American aircraft approached critical target areas. Both possibilities required continued vigilance and readiness to respond instantly to emerging threats that could materialize without warning. The mission timeline showed 47 minutes remaining until she reached the primary target area where intelligence assets had detected unusual activity that warranted investigation through methods that exceeded the capabilities of satellite reconnaissance or conventional aerial surveillance. Her aircraft's advanced sensor systems and electronic warfare capabilities would provide information that could influence strategic planning and tactical operations across multiple theaters of operation. Radio silence enveloped the cockpit as Thorne crossed deeper into hostile airspace, her communication systems monitoring multiple frequencies for any indication that enemy forces had detected her presence or were coordinating defensive responses against potential American reconnaissance activities. The electronic warfare displays showed increasingly complex electromagnetic signatures that suggested sophisticated air defense networks were active in the target area ahead. Threat warning systems suddenly activated with the distinctive tone that indicated surface-to-air missile radar had acquired her aircraft and was maintaining tracking lock despite her stealth capabilities and electronic countermeasures. The sophisticated air defense system had overcome her technological advantages through methods that weren't addressed in standard threat briefings or electronic warfare doctrine. Multiple SAM sites active, bearing 45 through 120 degrees, range approximately 40 nautical miles, she announced over the radio, providing threat information to Alpha Flight while simultaneously analyzing her tactical options for continuing the mission or withdrawing to reassess the situation. The missile systems appeared to be more advanced than intelligence reports had indicated, suggesting that hostile forces had recently upgraded their defensive capabilities. Electronic warfare systems responded automatically to the threat, generating jamming patterns and false targets designed to confuse enemy radar operators and degrade missile guidance accuracy if surface-to-air weapons were launched against her aircraft. The countermeasures represented the most advanced technology available, but their effectiveness against unknown enemy systems remained uncertain until tested under combat conditions. Phantom 7 recommend immediate withdrawal and reassessment of threat environment, came Alpha Flight Leader's transmission, reflecting standard tactical doctrine that prioritized aircraft survival over mission completion when facing unexpectedly sophisticated defensive systems. The formation commander was applying lessons learned from previous operations, where advanced threats had successfully engaged American aircraft despite technological advantages. Thorne considered her options while monitoring threat indicators that showed enemy radar systems were attempting to penetrate her electronic countermeasures through frequency changes and power increases that suggested adaptive technology designed specifically to counter American stealth capabilities. The situation had evolved beyond standard parameters, requiring decisions that balanced mission importance against aircraft survival and pilot safety. Alpha Flight Leader, Phantom 7 continuing mission profile. Electronic warfare systems are adapting to threat parameters and should provide sufficient protection for mission completion. Her response reflected both confidence in her aircraft's capabilities and understanding that the intelligence objectives justified accepting higher risk levels than standard operations typically allowed. The target area materialized on her sensor displays as a complex of buildings and vehicles that appeared to be conducting unusual nighttime activities despite the presence of American reconnaissance assets in the vicinity. Intelligence analysts had identified this location as potentially critical to understanding emerging threats, but previous attempts to gather detailed information had been unsuccessful due to sophisticated defensive systems. Advanced imaging systems revealed details that satellite reconnaissance couldn't provide: personnel movements, equipment configurations, and operational patterns that suggested this facility was involved in activities that posed significant threats to American interests and regional security. The information she was gathering would influence strategic planning and tactical operations across multiple theaters where similar threats might be developing. Surface-to-air missile sites remained active but had not launched weapons despite maintaining radar lock on her aircraft, suggesting that enemy commanders were either uncertain about engagement protocols or were preserving their defensive capabilities for more valuable targets. The tactical situation remained fluid and dangerous, requiring constant vigilance and readiness to respond to rapid changes in threat levels. Phantom 7 to Alpha Flight Leader, target area reconnaissance complete. Recommend your formation maintain standoff distance while I egress through the gap I've created in their defensive coverage. Her transmission provided tactical guidance while preparing to exit hostile airspace through the corridor her electronic warfare systems had established in enemy air defenses. The egress route carried her aircraft through the same dangerous airspace where surface-to-air missile systems continued tracking her movement despite ongoing electronic countermeasures that should have degraded their effectiveness significantly. The enemy's adaptive capabilities exceeded intelligence estimates and suggested that American technological advantages were smaller than strategic planning had assumed. As she cleared the primary threat area and began the return flight to forward operating base Chapman, Thorne reflected on the mission's implications for future operations in similar environments. The intelligence she had gathered would prove invaluable, but the defensive capabilities she had encountered suggested that conventional military approaches might prove inadequate against increasingly sophisticated adversaries who had developed specific countermeasures to American technological advantages. The mission had achieved its primary objectives while revealing threats and capabilities that would influence American strategic planning for years to come. Her unique position as a civilian contractor with access to advanced military technology had enabled operations that conventional forces couldn't have accomplished, validating her decision to pursue unconventional approaches to emerging security challenges that exceeded traditional military parameters and institutional constraints. The return flight to forward operating base Chapman proceeded through increasingly familiar airspace as Thorne's Super Hornet crossed back into friendly territory where surface-to-air missile threats diminished and communication with American ground controllers became possible once again. The successful mission had gathered intelligence that would prove crucial for understanding emerging threats, but the sophisticated defensive systems she had encountered suggested that future operations would require even more advanced capabilities and unconventional approaches. Phoenix Control, Phantom 7, requesting priority landing clearance. Mission complete, aircraft status green, no maintenance issues. Her transmission marked the successful conclusion of a reconnaissance operation that had pushed the boundaries of what single aircraft missions could accomplish in heavily defended environments where conventional formations might have suffered casualties or mission failure. Phantom 7, Phoenix Control, cleared for immediate approach runway 27. Emergency equipment standing by as precautionary measure. Captain Martinez's voice reflected the professional relief that marked successful completion of dangerous operations, where American personnel had faced significant risks to gather critical intelligence information. The landing approach revealed forward operating base Chapman as a complex of lights and activity that represented safety and friendly territory after hours of operating alone in hostile airspace, where detection could have resulted in immediate engagement by sophisticated surface-to-air missile systems. Ground personnel had prepared for her return with the thorough attention to detail that ensured rapid turnaround if follow-up missions became necessary. As her Super Hornet touched down on the runway and rolled out to the parking area where ground crews waited to secure the aircraft and begin post-flight inspections, Thorne reflected on the mission's significance beyond its immediate intelligence objectives. She had proven that unconventional approaches using advanced technology and flexible operational methods could achieve results that traditional military formations couldn't accomplish through standard doctrinal approaches. The post-flight debriefing would reveal the full scope of intelligence gathered during her reconnaissance mission, but preliminary analysis suggested that hostile forces possessed defensive capabilities that exceeded American intelligence estimates and required immediate reassessment of strategic planning assumptions. Her unique position as a civilian contractor with access to military technology had enabled the gathering of information that conventional reconnaissance methods couldn't have obtained. Phantom 7, Phoenix Control, welcome home. Debrief scheduled for 1100 hours in Conference Room Alpha. Intelligence personnel are standing by for immediate preliminary findings if you have critical information that can't wait for formal debriefing procedures. Martinez's transmission reflected the urgency that surrounded missions involving potential strategic implications for American security planning. Engine shutdown procedures proceeded with systematic thoroughness as Thorne secured all aircraft systems and prepared for the detailed inspections that would verify her Super Hornet's condition after operating in environments where electronic warfare and potential missile engagement had tested every system to its operational limits. The aircraft had performed flawlessly throughout the demanding mission, validating the advanced modifications that made such operations possible. Ground crews approached her aircraft with obvious curiosity about mission results and aircraft condition after operating in contested airspace, where previous reconnaissance attempts had encountered significant difficulties. Master Sergeant Davies supervised the post-flight inspection with meticulous attention to systems that had been stressed by electronic warfare operations and potential enemy countermeasures. As Thorne climbed down from her cockpit and removed her helmet, she carried with her not only critical intelligence about enemy capabilities, but also proof that unconventional approaches using advanced technology could achieve strategic objectives that traditional military methods couldn't accomplish. The mission had validated her decision to pursue independent operations that complemented rather than competed with conventional military capabilities. The debriefing room filled gradually with intelligence analysts, operations officers, and senior commanders who recognized that Thorne's reconnaissance mission had gathered information crucial for understanding threats that could influence American strategic planning across multiple theaters of operation. The data she had collected would require extensive analysis to fully understand its implications for future military operations and strategic deterrence planning. Colonel Harrison opened the debriefing session with acknowledgement of the mission's success and appreciation for the risks Thorne had accepted to gather intelligence that conventional reconnaissance methods couldn't have obtained safely or effectively.